Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and this is part 6 in my Gears of War cosplay armor build series. Now, in this build video, we finally get to move on to my favorite part, and that is adding paint. We're going to take this from a raw foam chest piece, and by the time we're done with it, it's going to look like battle-worn metal. I promise you that. Now, just like all my other paint jobs, it's not going to be as simple as spraying it with some silver and calling it done. You know me, I like my layers, and this is going to have lots and lots and lots and lots of layers. So I want to show you all the steps that it's going to take to transform this raw foam into something that looked like it jumped right out of the screen. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we paint, I almost forgot to add this Under Armour piece to the chest. This piece will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. A rotary tool and a heat gun are used to round over the edges before this piece can be glued to the backside of the armor. It's just another detail that shows a softer lining compared to the hard metal armor. A little bit of masking tape is used to block off the lights. The foam armor is going to be sealed with 3 to 4 light coats of Plasti-Dip. Rust-Oleum flat antique nickel can now be dusted onto the surface as a base layer. Liquitex iridescent rich silver is now applied to the surface using a mop brush. This will help seal the pores in the foam but also prep the surface for additional layers of paint. So the armor isn't just gray, some dirty down spray is lightly added to the surface. Parts of this can then be removed with a damp paper towel until I get the desired look. These layers can now all be sealed using a dusting of Valspar flat sealant. To smooth out the foam even more, I'm going to apply a thin layer of graphite powder. This is rubbed into the surface using a paper towel before being buffed into a higher sheen. Liquitex Mars Black can now be applied to all of the soft parts, the neck seal, the shoulder guards, and the under armor we just glued on. This same pigment is also applied to the ribbing on the back, all of the belts, and the circles on the front. A very watered down mixture of Mars Black can now be applied to the entire surface. A damp paper towel can be used to remove a lot of the pigment. But the main point here is that the paint gets down into all of the details that I added in previous videos. For this next step, I mixed together some Liquitex Cobalt and Brilliant Blue. This is first going to be applied to the panel in the middle of his back. It's also painted onto these small detail strips. Making a stencil out of poster board, I could also apply the paint to the circles on the front. Liquitex iridescent rich silver can now be used to highlight some of the battle damage. I also use it to paint certain areas on the armor because I don't want them to all be the same hue. I also use a large mop brush to stipple this paint onto the surface. This is going to break up the uniformity of the silver and make it more visually interesting. Some of the paint can be removed in certain areas. Using the side of a small filbert brush, I apply more of this pigment to the armor panels, giving them an edge highlight. Now notice the pigment is applied randomly to give it more of that wear and tear look. Iridescent bright silver is applied to some panels to make them stand out. A mixture of bright silver and Mars black is applied to certain surfaces to give it a contrast. Removing the tape, I also need to address the exposed foam surrounding the LEDs. Using more poster board, I create some stencils for my armor. Here I'm applying cadmium yellow to the shoulder straps. For the warning triangles on his chest, I start with some cadmium yellow. This is followed up with a smaller stencil and some cadmium red. Now these of course look too bright and new, so I go back while the paint is still damp and give it some battle damage. Using more cadmium red, triangles are placed around the neck seal. You could of course print off your own decals, but I love this manual approach. For the skull in the middle, I drew on the back with some graphite and then I traced this onto some poster board. Now I only need half of it and I carefully cut out this stencil using a hobby knife. Once complete, some Liquitex heavy body parchment could be stippled through the stencil. Now this one didn't come out quite as clean, but I can go back in with a detail brush on my black and silver mixture. After the surface was dry, I went back in with a damp paper towel and I wore the paint away. This gives it a really natural, worn look. More details are added to the bottom of the chest, once again using my cadmium yellow and red. All these paint areas definitely need to get worn down to make it look as though this armor has been through a lot. There are some additional details in the circles on the front. These are a little more difficult and almost had to be completely hand painted. So for areas like this, get a small brush and a steady hand. These details, along with some additional triangles, are also added to the back of the armor. Just like the front, the detail for the middle of this back piece was cut out of some poster board. Once again, I only needed half. I could flip to the opposite side and stipple on more parchment. Once the paint had been applied, I scrubbed away part of this surface to give it a weathered look as well. I mix up more of the bright silver and Mars black, this time adding a little bit more black. This pigment is painted onto all of the rivet heads using a detail brush. And it's subtle color shifts like this that really make all these layers pop.
So you all can see the steps that I took to put together my own custom set of Gears of War armor. And this has been a long series because there's a lot of details. And I still have some additional armor pieces that I'd like to add to this before I take it down to Dragon Con. Now those templates I do hope to save and convert into PDFs just like everything else. But because of the time crunch, I will not be actually filming most of that process. But they should be straightforward enough that you can put them together on your own. Now, if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.